Welcome to our May 2019 webinar from ACU Idea Lab. We're grateful you're able to join us today, most likely on your lunch break at work, to learn from our amazing instructors. These webinars will be recorded and available in the future on our Idea Lab YouTube site, which will be emailed to you at the conclusion of today's session. On our main site, acuidealab.com, you can also learn more about what we do for professional development. If you would like more information on our online degree programs, please visit acu.edu/online. All of our online degree programs are designed for working professionals like yourself. Today, we will hear from Dr. Halstead, Associate Professor of Marriage and Family Therapy here at ACU, who I will introduce momentarily. I am Noelle Awan, and I'm your host this afternoon. Now, you will notice that all participants are muted and hidden, but there will be opportunities for you to participate in today's session, as well as ask questions using the chat function found at the bottom of your Zoom window. Let's begin using the chat with everyone sharing their first name and the city and state they're joining from. Here is today's agenda. Dr. Halstead will present on caring for our whole selves, and we'll cover the 4 main areas of self-care. I will close this out no later than 12:45 with some next step items, and we welcome anyone who would like to stay after for a Q&A with Dr. Halstead. During this webinar, you will gain information about holistic self-care, receive tools in each of the 4 areas of self-care, and examine current practices of your own self-care. Now I'd like to introduce our faculty sharing some of her expertise with us today. Dr. Jackie Halstead is an associate professor with the Department of Marriage and Family Therapy at ACU Online. She has been a licensed marriage and family therapist for the past 30 years and has trained therapists for 20 years. She recently completed a term of service on the National Board of the Profession, American Association for Marriage and Family Therapy. Dr. Halstead is the CEO of Selah Center for Spiritual Formation, located in Nashville, Tennessee, and she speaks frequently on the topics of mental health, relationships, and spiritual formation at the national and international levels. I'm pleased and honored to welcome Dr. Jackie Halstead.
Well, hello, everybody. I'm so thrilled to be with you today, and welcome. We have a great group today, and I'm thrilled to be able to share with you something that is near and dear to my heart. So Noelle has kind of introduced the topic of holistic self-care, and we have 4 different areas that we're going to cover: physical, emotional, relational, and spiritual. Each of these areas is vital to our well-being, and we used to segment them all into different compartments, but we've realized, especially in the last few years, that we cannot separate them. They all connect to each other, and there's a growing body of research how physical affects emotional and relational, and our spiritual well-being affects our physical well-being. It's just all very interconnected, and it actually was separated in the ancient Greek culture. Before that, like in cultures before that, and even in the Hebrew culture, everything was integrated. But it was the Greeks that decided that there were primary 2 parts of us, and the physical one part, and that was typically viewed in a negative way. We need to discipline our bodies, keep it in subjection. It's where our bad, sinful part is. And then our soul was the good part. And so there was an emphasis on focusing on the soul to the exclusion of the physical. But again, there's a growing body of research that sees we cannot separate these. They're all connected. But in our Western culture, we tend to compartmentalize, but we really can't. If we focus on our physical to the exclusion of the others, we may be in great shape physically, but our relationships may be falling apart, or we may feel depressed or down, and we may have lost our connection to God. So we can't just do that. If we just focus on our emotional, we may be very self-aware, but we may be sick, or we may be not attending to the people we need to. Or if we just focus on our spiritual, we may not be really living in the present with the people around us. So all that to say, we have to talk about all of them when we're talking about self-care. And so that's why we're going to talk about each of these separately, but how they connect to each other. So we're going to start with physical care. And this is typically the area that people think about when they think about self-care. How do I slow down, get some rest, take a break, go on a vacation? But we're again seeing that it affects all the other areas. If we neglect the care of our bodies, it will impact us emotionally and psychologically, and very much impacts how we relate to others and how we feel about ourselves. So an example, my husband a few weeks ago, he was having a sore tooth. So after a few days, finally went to the dentist and had to have a root canal done. And he reacted to the medication. And so for probably 10 days, felt awful. And, near the end of that, he went back to the doctor and got things straightened out. But that was just not a physical ordeal for him and for the rest of us. When you're not feeling well, sometimes you're grumpy, or you're short-tempered, irritable, down. It just affects everything else. So I'm making a case again for the integration of all of these, but I'm not talking about the need to be a bodybuilder, although that's wonderful, but there's a lot we can do in normal life without having to go to an extreme. So we're going to talk about a number of areas within each of these larger categories. And the first one under physical care is eating. And this is stuff that's a no-brainer. We all know about healthy eating. We are saturated with this. So we know cut carbs, increase fruit and vegetables, drink more water, eat lean eats. We all know that. But really, the discipline of eating well is more about the choices we make, and at times denying ourselves of what we want for what is best for us. So occasional splurges are fine. We all need ice cream and chocolate occasionally, but it's important to keep them occasional. And we need to watch for the mindset of quotations, I deserve this because this. So for example, I may have had a rough class teaching students, or may have a student who's really yanking on my chain. And so I leave the classroom and I say, well, I deserve a latte because that was a rough class. So it's that type of thing. And again, occasionally that's fine. But when that's a habit, when it's a daily, well, I'm tired today, so I need this, or I just achieved this, so I need this, and et cetera, et cetera. So it's developing the capacity to recognize that I deserve to eat well, because that's a reward in itself. And that sounds a little bit ludicrous, but again, the idea is to stop rewarding ourselves with a bad thing every time we feel the need. And then another factor is to watch dieting. And this is a familiar concept too, where it often has a boomerang effect, where we go on a diet, but we're not changing our eating habits. We're doing some really deprivation of something. So for instance, a friend of mine just finished a 10-day juice cleanse. And she was really excited because she had lost 14 pounds, but I happened to see her the day after, and she was so excited that she gets to eat everything she wants again. And we kind of laughed about that boomerang thing, but there's truth in that. If our diets are not helping us change the way we eat on a regular basis, they're really not helpful in the long run. And another, we're just drinking lots of water. We're primarily made of water, so recognizing that we don't substitute tea or coffee or pop or other drinks with things in them. We really need to increase our water. So doing those things, again, these are no-brainers. We all know them. But it's realizing or putting it in the frame that I deserve to eat in a way that makes me feel better. And we know when we eat in this way, it has an emotional effect for us. The second one under physical care is exercise. And again, the reiteration, I'm not talking about being bodybuilders or preparing for a marathon, but it's incorporating regular exercise, movement into our life. Regular exercise releases endorphins and increases levels of serotonin in our brains. We feel more up or happier or more normal when we exercise on a regular basis. So a rule of thumb is doing cardio 3 or 4 times a week and strength building 3 times a week. So by cardio, that means getting our heart rates up for a sustained time. Kind of the general amount is 20 to 30 minutes. And so there's a lot of ways we can do this. And it needs to be something that I enjoy to a certain extent and that I'm willing to incorporate for my life. So it may be initially that I'm going to start at 5 minutes, and it may be that I'm going to have to walk around my office for 5 minutes. I used to live in a duplex owned by this older couple who lived in a house on the same property, and she was in her late 70s, and she had figured out how many times walking around her dining table she needed to do to make a quarter mile. So she walked around that dining table a lot. So that's kind of extreme, but it's about moving in our day, and we're such a sedentary culture that having time in our day where we walk up the stairs, walk around the office, we've been sitting a couple hours, stand and move a little bit. It's just giving our body some movement and trying to build that up to, again, the 20 to 30 minutes 3 times a week. And then strength building, especially as we get older, is really important. It keeps our core strong. It improves our balance. You know, people fall as they get older all the time, and it can really be dangerous. So we want to gain strength in our core. So again, starting small and just looking on the website or hiring a personal trainer or going to the Y, it's pretty easy to find simple regimens. But the important thing is we just do it. And again, as we age, this is going to become more and more important. So developing those habits, factoring them into our daily routine is vital. And then the third one is sleep. We all know how good we feel after a good night's rest. That makes such a difference, and it has a significant impact on our emotional well-being and on our relationships, how we respond to others. You know, that phrase, getting up on the wrong side of the bed. Either we have done that or someone we know close to us has done that, and say, "Ooh, what side of the bed did you get up on?" And so it does impact how we are and how we relate to others. So often, or kind of the norm, is 7 to 8 hours of sleep for the average adult. But it's good to kind of figure out what is your need. And so next time you have a few days in a row that you're off work, maybe on vacation, set a regular time to go to sleep, and then don't set an alarm, and just see when you wake up. And after a few nights, you can see, okay, looks like I need about 8 hours of sleep a night, or looks like 7 is about what I need. Or, it helps us realize what our body needs. And if we're not getting enough, there are some really easy things we can do to help facilitate that. Sometimes it may be we need to go to a physician if we're really dealing with severe insomnia. But before we do that, there's some other things we can do to help. So one is establish a routine that helps us wind down before we go to sleep. Those of us who have children or have been a child or have babysat, we know that with kids, when you're putting them to bed, you don't want to have them running races and give them a bunch of sugar right before you want them to go to sleep. We typically slow the schedule down, do something calm, don't eat a lot of sugar. And that's what we as adults need as well. We need to have a routine where we slow down. We don't drink caffeine or eat caffeine or sugar. And we allow our brain and body to slow down. So one of those factors in the routine should be avoiding screen time right before we go to bed. And that allows our brain to kind of slow down and start to relax. So TV, phones, iPads, any of those things, just putting it down for a while and maybe having a conversation with someone, flipping through a magazine, reading a little bit on a book, not a screen. They're finding a mounting body of evidence that shows that looking at a screen right before you go to sleep can keep you awake. And then another factor, and we had talked about this in our last category, but when we exercise on a regular basis, we're more apt to sleep well because our bodies are physically tired. So again, as we live in this sedentary culture, we don't ever give our bodies a chance to really be tired and to work. So putting those factors in place can help us be able to get some good sleep. So we've talked about these three. Now we're going to do a little poll. So you're going to see a poll pop up on your screen. Go ahead and click the one you choose. So the question is, which of the physical care strategies do you find the most challenging? Eating habits, getting sufficient sleep, or exercising on a regular basis? So go ahead and make your choice. And we're just going to do this little poll it's anonymous, but we'll see what the group struggles with the most. Well, it looks pretty even, doesn't it? So it looks like some chose, probably the most chose eating habits. And that really is challenging to discipline ourselves to eat right. But the next two are pretty close behind, getting sufficient sleep and exercising on a regular basis. So just, what I encourage you from as a takeaway from this seminar today is just choose a few things that you're going to focus on and be intentional about incorporating into your life. So our next category here is emotional care. And we'll talk about relationships in our next segment, but I want to start this category by talking about the importance of having an emotional support system. And this is, what I mean by this is having people in your life who you can be yourself with, who just accept you for who you are, warts and all. And so it's wonderful if this is your family, but not everybody has that healthy support system coming from their family. So it can also be friends, work colleagues, people you go to church with. The important thing is finding other people who you can be with whom you really feel that you can be yourself, who will offer you unconditional regard. So we are relational beings. We aren't meant to be alone. And sometimes this doesn't come naturally. Or we may be in a new setting, or we may be in some life situation that we're finding ourselves alone. So an important piece here is to be proactive about this. Don't just sit back and wait for other people to come to you. Invest time in a context that offers this. So, some obvious ones are church or nonprofits where you can volunteer and both offer your time, but also get to know other people who have the same passion. Sometimes there's activities in the community that are available. One of my daughters, when she was first moved to Nashville, she connected with an online group that liked to eat at different ethnic restaurants. And so they would meet once a month, and there were just about 5 of them, but they would try a different ethnic restaurant each month. And this was a really fun way to get to know new people and for them to get to know her, and in a pretty safe environment. So being willing to stick our necks out and seek this support system for us is really important. And sometimes we may find ourselves in a situation where, we realize that we're pushing people away. And it may be unconscious, it may be unintentional, but being willing to address that. And that can be by seeking help or asking other people who we trust, okay, is there something I could do to be a better friend to you, or that type of thing. So we'll talk about that a bit more in this next category. But the next one is self-awareness. And by self-awareness, I mean being aware of what's going on inside of us, especially emotionally. So in our fast-paced, frantic culture, sometimes we just push through those things, and we may feel bad or feel off, and we just ignore it and keep going. Well, self-awareness is really important for emotional care, for us to pause and recognize what's going on inside of us and pay attention to it. No emotion is bad, but what we do with it can be functional or dysfunctional. So rather than stuff it, we acknowledge it. And by doing that, it helps us not be reactive. So let me give you an example. I may be wake up and be feeling sad and kind of start pushing through my day and just kind of be going through the day with this low level of sadness. If I take some time during that day to pay attention to it, okay, what's going on that's sad? And then I realize, okay, I'm missing maybe for me it'd be I'm missing my daughter. She lives in another city and I don't get to see her very often. And so paying attention to that, and maybe it just takes a phone call, or maybe I need to try to find a way to see her. Or it may mean that I'm just feeling lonely in general and I need to reach out to somebody to get together. But it's about paying attention, and then I'm not snapping at other people because I'm kind of having this low feeling of sadness or another feeling, but I'm able to be who I need to be with the people I'm with. And so I'm not talking about being a drama king or queen. I'm talking about being aware of those feelings, especially sadness or hurt or fear. Because when I acknowledge those, then I can look to where it's coming from and maybe address it. Now, the next area, and this self-awareness connects with it, but the next area is trauma. And this is about, there are some times when I just feel so bad and it's not going away, or maybe I'm reactive to everything and it keeps coming up over and over. It may be time to take a deeper look and look at what's going on in terms of trauma in my life. And as therapists, we talk about trauma as big T trauma or little t trauma. We all have little t trauma, and that just means with dealing with hard things in life that knock us down. So little t trauma might be, maybe someone was mean to me at work yesterday, and maybe my car had a flat tire, and maybe I'm not feeling well. All those things can be in the little t trauma. Big T trauma, of course, is going to be a more serious trauma. So maybe we were sexually abused as a child, or maybe we were in a pretty severe automobile accident, or maybe we lost someone really close to us. Recently, I talked to a friend who they had a year ago, they had lost their 3-month-old daughter to SIDS. And she's experiencing a great deal of anger right now and just can't seem to get a handle on it. Well, that's a case where she knows where that's coming from, but she doesn't know how to deal with that anger. So my point with trauma is sometimes we're going to need the help of another person. I may have become self-aware and allowed myself to think where stuff is going from, but I still am not able to get a handle on it or get a handle on how I'm reacting to it. In those cases, it's very appropriate and important to reach out, maybe starting with a friend or a minister, or maybe getting a counselor. I certainly am a fan of the profession and have been in counseling myself at different times through my life. But it's really helpful to have an objective person be able to help you work through that. And especially if it's something big, to be able to help you move through it and get to the other side of that. So I'm going to stop here again, and we're going to take another poll about emotional care. So how much attention do you personally give to your emotional care? 1, this is a top priority. 2, some, but not as much as I'd like. 3, very little. 4, I don't attend to emotional care. Okay, it looks like the bulk of us say some, but not as much as I'd like to. So that is really good if you even give it some attention. And I think it's a growing awareness within our culture that that's okay to do so. We all probably have parents or grandparents who had the pull yourself up by your bootstraps mentality, and that works for a while, but long lasting can really take a toll. So I'm glad to see that the bulk of us are giving that some attention. Okay, let's move on to our next area, and this is closely related to emotional, but this is relational care. So we talked about needing a support system, people who connect to us, and give us a safe haven, we also need to be willing to put some energy into our relationships and how we are interacting with others. So the first is time. Being willing to give both quantity and quality time is vital. Quantity in terms of just carving out time in my life to be with those people who are important to me. But also quality is important. And by that I mean being present. There's a phrase by Jim Elliot, wherever I am, be all there. So that means when I'm with the people I love, I look them in the eye. I'm giving them the gift of significance. And so that entails putting down our devices or turning off the TV. It's telling them, you are significant to me and you're worth my time, my while. And the second, closely related to that, is affirmation. So that's letting the person know, as I mentioned earlier, that I can offer them unconditional regard. I love you. You are important to me. I value you. So this is sometimes in words. It's also in actions, like the time. But it goes beyond, and it's very important to thank people for what they do. That's really important. But affirmation goes beyond that. It's about recognizing their qualities, their characteristics, the way they're put together, and letting them know, I value you. Like I said earlier, warts and all, you are important to me. And one tip in this area is the importance of times of transition throughout our day and giving this gift of affirmation. So by that I mean when we leave and when we come back. So when we leave for the day, making a point to seek out those people we're leaving and saying goodbye. See you tonight, or see you later. When you get back, seeking them out. Or when the other person gets back, putting down what we're doing and just giving them a few moments of affirmation. Good to see you. I'm glad you're home. How was your day? When we get up in the morning, we may not be morning people, but saying good morning. It's acknowledging their presence and that they are valuable in my life. When they go to bed, taking a few moments as I'm stumbling to bed to seek the person out and give them a kiss or give them a hug or just say good night. Those things are really important and help us, if we're focusing on even just those times of transition, that helps it become a regular part of our life to recognize the good characteristics of those in our lives and to be grateful to them. And then a third area is about vulnerability. We talked earlier about being available to people, and this is really important in terms of sharing our whole selves with the people with whom we're in relationship. So, for example, I may be having, this goes back to the self-awareness. I may be feeling kind of down, and I'm just dealing with that on my own, just taking the time to share with the person in my life. I'm kind of sad that my daughter doesn't live here. If that's the thing that I'm identifying. Or, I keep snapping at people at work. I think underlying it, I'm afraid that my position is at risk. Or, so we're opening ourselves up to the people in our lives. So that's a vital piece of being in relationship. We can kind of get into a phase where we're kind of taking people for granted and just going through the motions. But if we're willing to be open and vulnerable with each other, it keeps it at a fresh, open level. So that's key. I had one person I was working with who, he was a man and he was really struggling with having relationships. And he said, I want to have these close, deep relationships, but I just really don't have any in my life. And so we were talking about different possibilities of maybe people he could reach out to. And he said, you know, I am in this breakfast group. We meet every Friday morning. We've been meeting for 11 years. He said, but we always just talk about surface stuff. He said, I think I'd like to try with them. And because he was very fond of these people, but they had never gone deep. So I challenged him, okay, just take that step to ask if they'd be open to that type of relationship. And so the next time I saw him, he said, I did it. He said, I told them how I was feeling and that I'd like to go to a deeper level. And he said it was like the others in the group were holding their breath, waiting for somebody to take that step. So it was a really beautiful example of, it's a little scary, but putting yourself out there can really reap some benefits and some beautiful relationships. And then finally, I do need to say something in this category about having healthy boundaries. Because people are people and we're not always safe. And so with those others, giving of our time, affirming, being vulnerable, we also need to be cautious in a healthy way, having healthy boundaries with those with whom we're in contact or relationship with. So I'm not talking about the category of abuse. And of course, physical abuse, sexual abuse, reaching out and getting some help for that. And there's also some significant emotional or psychological abuse. If you're in a relationship with someone who is continually demeaning you, cutting you down, tearing you apart, that's a category where you need to seek some help. And I urge you, if you're in a relationship like that, at home, on the workplace, in any category of your life, reach out and get some help there, because that is really hard not to internalize those messages if you're hearing them over and over again. So that's important. But we also need to have healthy boundaries in our regular relationships. And what that means is it's not a lopsided relationship in which I'm just taking care of you, but it's also I'm letting you take care of me, but I'm also requiring that as part of this healthy relationship. So one author talks about the two hands of forgiveness, where he talks about one being reaching out in reconciliation and one holding, being held up in safety. And so I'm offering myself to a person, but I'm also saying, but I require you to treat me as a valuable person here. And so in whatever setting we're in, we need to have those two hands out there. Again, one reaching out in vulnerability, openness, transparency, but the other saying, I require you to treat me well. And if you are struggling with that piece, that again is an indication that it would be very good to seek some outside help to be able to just look at, okay, why am I not requiring that of other people to treat me well? And sometimes we just need an objective voice to help us in those situations. So we're going to pause again, and you got this now, and take another poll. So which relationship requires the most emotional energy? Our spouse or significant other, our parents, our children, our friends, or our coworkers, and that can include bosses. So take a moment to choose the one that jumps out at you. Okay, it looks like a pretty even spread here, with the most being coworkers, and that can be challenging to have a context in which we're not feeling safe or well treated or valued. So I encourage you to reach out in those situations if you need specific help with certain relationships. But it also looks like the others are pretty even spread in terms of any relationship requires energy. And one piece about that is every relationship we're in is going to involve some conflict. And that could have been another category we talked about, but and that's in healthy relationships. If you put two people together, there's going to be some clashing. But it's what you do with that, and if you learn how to have healthy ways of dealing with that, that's important. But seeking help or reaching out is really important. And so let's spend some time with our final category, and this is another very important aspect of who we are. And I come from a Christian lens, faith tradition, but this is all people. We are spiritual beings. And the first category here is we need to have meaning in our life. We need to be part of something bigger than ourselves. So recognizing our role as instruments of good in this world, or helping those less fortunate than ourselves. It's vital for our well-being to be part of something that is not just focused on ourselves. The second area in terms of spiritual care is reliance on a higher power. For me, that's Christ or God. We are not alone in this life. Recognizing that is very important for our emotional well-being, because we will all have struggles and we all will have people who disappoint us. So being able and willing to facilitate that relationship with God, or spend time and energy into deepening our relationship with God, is very important. I just returned a few weeks ago from a silent retreat, and I go on an 8-day silent retreat every year. And it's hard. It's hard to be in silence that long, and it's hard because when the distractions are moved away, God digs deep. But I find it as such a significant part of my life and ministry and work and all aspects of my life to have this focus time with God. And I know that 8 days is a bit extreme for some, but the important thing is having that as one of my emphases in my life, is to continue to give energy, time, attention to my relationship with God is very important. The next one is categories having spiritual practices, and those are to facilitate the relationship with God. So having time set aside where I'll read scripture, sacred text, where I'll pray, where I open my eyes to rituals. So even praying at meals is a ritual that I incorporate into my day. Spending some time by myself in the morning. One of my rituals is I light a candle to kind of signify the role of the Holy Spirit in my life. So there's much variety in practices we can do, but recognizing that along with physical, relational, emotional care, we need to attend to our spiritual lives as well. And then the final aspect of spiritual care is investing in a faith community. And this goes back to the meaning, being part of a community that is beyond ourselves, that's bigger than ourselves, that helps me in my relationship with God. And we all know that there's no church that is perfect, not even close. But it's a discipline to be able to be in relationship with others who are on the same journey, but who aren't exactly like me. People in whom I can pour myself and encourage them, and people who I can lean on for their encouragement. People who will ask me the God questions. So sometimes that is a small group, maybe a group of friends who I get with for prayer, but also being willing to seek out and be part of a larger faith community as well is very important. So we're going to pause again and take another poll here. So in which area of spiritual care do you find the greatest benefit? Relying on a higher power, spiritual practice, or being part of a faith community? Okay, so it looks like the bulk of the group chose relying on a higher power. And of course, all these are connected, aren't they? But recognizing the benefit of leaning into that relationship, or the way I like to envision it is in leaning into God's embrace and recognizing God is with me every moment. I am never alone. But of course, the other two also are vital for our spiritual care. So we've come to the end of our time together, and I just want to say a little bit in summary. We need, again, all these types of care, and so we do what we can. There's a lot we don't have control over. But I would encourage you to just take a few nuggets from today. We've covered a lot of territory. But to recognize that there's some external factors on these issues, of course, or these categories that we have no control over. It might be our work context, and many of you chose that as a category that takes a lot of emotional energy. Maybe I can't control that, or maybe there's an illness I'm dealing with, or a tragedy, or maybe there's other people who I have to deal with who are just hard. But along with that, and I hope you've seen as we've gone through each of these categories, there are some things that we do have control over, or at least some control. We can address how we treat our bodies, what we put in them, whether we exercise. And again, starting small is a key. Emotional health. If I'm in a good place, I know I'm going to respond more effectively to factors that are outside my control. So attending or doing the things I can to attend to my emotional well-being. Relationally, I can do my part and offer what I can to those around me, and hopefully they'll reciprocate. If not, I can seek outside help. And then spiritually, the vital piece of having that relationship with the divine, I see through a different lens when I'm grounded in God's love and faith. So I've so enjoyed sharing my thoughts with you, and I thank you for taking the polls and for participating. Again, I've thrown a lot at you, but if you take one thing today, it will have been worth it. So blessings to you, and take care. I'll turn it back over to Noelle.
Well, thank you so much, Dr. Halstead. Now, we will open it up for Q&A shortly, and while you're thinking of questions for Dr. Halstead, you'll see a link posted in the chat for anyone interested in finding out more about our online degree programs. You will also receive an email within the next 24 hours with a recording of today's session, including a brief survey, and we would appreciate your feedback as we continue these webinars in the future. We would also like to invite you to ACU Online's Open House webinar next week on Thursday, May 30th at 6:30 p.m. to have a deeper look into our online degree programs and hear from some of our advisors and program directors. We're also posting a registration link in the chat for this event. If you do have further questions, feel free to email us at idealab@acu.edu. And we want to sincerely thank you all for joining us, and a special thank you again to Dr. Halstead for sharing your knowledge with us today. We will now open it up for Q&A, so feel free to type your questions in the chat.
I'm so glad I answered all your questions. Well, blessings to all of you. And we have a few more minutes, so you can still type, but I just want to, again, just ask God's richest blessings on you and in your life and your context. And if you ever need to get a hold of me, you can reach me through Idea Lab here.
Wonderful. Well, to go ahead and wrap things up, if there aren't any further questions, we'll go ahead and conclude today's session. As Dr. Halstead mentioned, if you have further questions, feel free to email us or visit our website at acuidealab.com. Thank you again for joining us today at ACU Idea Lab, and we hope you have a blessed day.